Hello, I'm Mriganka Awati, senior writer at Heritage Insights. This is International Open Access Week, and the theme this year is Open for Climate Justice. So I'm in conversation with two individuals who are involved in climate research. Travis Tai, who is a fisheries ecologist at Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium in Canada, and James Robinson, who is a coral reef ecologist at Lancaster Environment Centre in the UK. So let's get started. Could both of you briefly discuss some of the major challenges you face when conducting climate research and when you're collaborating with other climate researchers?
Well, if we were to narrow it down to maybe one broad thing, I think is the number of challenges that we face currently and trying to narrow down what we are interested in and what we do to something that can be packaged up in one research project. So, I mean, we all know that climate change is impacting many facets of the world. So finding what would be most impactful at a time where research needs to be produced rapidly is one of the most challenging things.
Yeah, I think related to what Travis is saying, for me, as a coral reef ecologist, we often do work that's quite siloed within people who do coral reef ecology, but climate change is affecting different aspects of ecosystems and societies at different speeds in different places. And so understanding and bringing that knowledge from other fields into our field, I find that is probably the biggest challenge.
What do you believe are the top hurdles in using climate research to develop global strategies that are aimed at mitigating climate risk?
I guess it relates to what I just said, really, is when you say you're interested in bleaching on coral reefs and you want to understand about the climate process that led to that. A top hurdle is, where do you find the data that tells you the heat stress on a coral reef? Or how do you interpret it? How do you code it? How do you analyze it? So bringing in those discipline-specific skills is a big hurdle.
How can making climate research open access help overcome some of these challenges? So, for instance, for researchers, how will publishing open access benefit climate researchers, both those who are conducting it and those who are reading the research and building on it?
I think the biggest thing with conducting research is finding data and trying to create new ideas from existing literature and other research that has been done. So with open access, being able to access those data sets and literature is extremely important. One of the biggest hurdles is finding data, especially with the immense amount of data. You want to streamline how you collect that data. You know it's there, but sometimes there are huge hurdles in finding it. And some of the biggest things that we face right now in my current position is trying to find data, even though it's supposed to be publicly available. It's kind of lost in a web online. And if data were presented in a more accessible way, I think this would facilitate quicker research outputs and make our lives a bit easier.
Yeah, I guess me and Travis are coming from a similar position of we're trying to find data and then find ways in which to analyze that that are up to date with the most cutting edge methods. And so to do that, there is a great movement, strong movement for publishing all these data and sometimes publishing the scripts. But like Travis was saying, it's not clear how the data should be interpreted or used all the time. So the accompanying metadata might not be fantastic. And this is something that's like evolving really rapidly. So it's getting better and better. Publications now are coming out with data sets all the time. And it's just taking that next step of saying, here's the data set and here's how you might reproduce this analysis. So I think we're getting there.
So when you publish your research, how do you decide which journal to publish it in, or specifically which open access journal to submit your research to?
A lot of the times it depends on who you're working with and what kind of impact you want to make with your publication or your manuscript. And we often shoot highest first and kind of trickle down from there. It's unfortunate that some of the biggest journals, Science and Nature, some of those areas that you can publish in are not open access unless you pay an extremely large fee. But we try to shoot for the ones that are just slightly below those impacts, journals with such high impact, and get it out open access. We do come from wealthy institutions, so paying for the open access fee isn't always a hurdle for us, but it definitely is not a cheap option to do. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles, is justifying the cost for the impact. But I think majority of the times that we've been publishing now, we're shooting for open access and working in those costs into research grants. So that's kind of the way we've moved towards.
Yeah, what Travis is saying about the open access fees is, it seems to be that's the model of doing it now, and it appears quite a big problem because the fees are so large. We're talking thousands of pounds just to publish open access. So I think this push for open access has been jumped on as well in terms of profits to sort of make it impossible for some parts of the world to publish open access because the research investment isn't the same as what we're receiving. At Lancaster, for example, we have already lots of subscriptions with journals that mean we get open access on most publications. So choosing where to go isn't as big a deal, which is fine for us, but obviously it then becomes really exclusive. And the way the open access model has changed in the last 5 or 10 years has excluded a lot of people on a sort of financial basis. So that needs to change, I think.
There are certain concerns that researchers may have about choosing to publish their research open access. There might be some researchers who are not as familiar with open access publishing and who may have concerns about the quality of the journal. What are some of these fears or concerns you think that would need to be addressed before for these researchers?
Yeah, I don't know that many concerns, I'll be honest. The quality of the journal, that's a concern whether or not you're publishing open access or not. And there are lots of great open access journals. So for me, I don't see a concern in the quality of the research, like from researchers that I'm talking to. And I only hear concerns about how much it costs.
So there's been a lot of a lot of attention, a lot of discussion about predatory publishing. So that's been one of the concerns that researchers have. Like, how do I know whether the journal I want to publish in or the journal I'm considering, if it's a valid journal or if it's a genuine journal? What do you think might be some concerns for researchers before they consider publishing open access?
I think you raise a good point. That's the first thing that came to my mind, is the predatory journals. But I think the open access and non-open access is kind of independent of predatory journals. We all have to watch out for those. And one of the, I guess, tips that I would say is to rely on your mentors. We are all trained under some other researcher, and they've been around for a while and they know which journals to publish in. And from the literature that you collect, you'll see which journals those papers are published in. And of course, using those would be the best. And I've only ever been solicited via email by predatory journals that are not very recognizable by name to me. So I think that's one thing to watch out for. But we often choose to publish within the same branch of journals that we frequently go with. So, and I wouldn't say I know a ton about new and upcoming journals because I think I don't know much about that, but it must be hard because if you're a new journal that wants to get out there, there's so many hurdles and a bunch of predatory competitors that it would be hard to filter through which ones would be legitimate.
Now, at the policy level, how can open access publishing accelerate climate justice?
Yeah, I think I sort of touched on this a little bit and didn't express it properly, but a lot of our research, well, much of it isn't open access, but because research investment is so skewed towards Western or global North countries, it excludes a lot of the global South where climate impacts are being felt first and hardest. And so pushing this open science framework should hopefully mean there's more equitable access to research and use of research and practice in research. So it should be able to contribute to a sort of more climate justice in that sense.
I'm not sure if it would occur, but having open, one of the biggest hurdles is creating that interdisciplinary team to connect some of the really basic science we do to the policy level, and keeping things open access keeps things more transparent, and hopefully it facilitates more discussion and collaboration across the different disciplines to create a team that can actually make change from the research level all the way to the policy level, which is often disconnected.
So in your Frontiers paper, you had mentioned how policy documents cited open studies more often than closed. So can that too have an impact on policy making?
Yeah, I think definitely. Sorry, Trav. It just in the last year, I've started to work with a couple of more policy-oriented organizations. So World Fish, for example, they're an organization that promote sustainable use of fisheries. And I know that a lot of researchers working with it in World Fish might not have access to the entire body of scientific literature like you would if you're in a university. So just having that open access available to people who are actually working on policy, it's got to be huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things is being able to access these research outputs in a timely manner, and everything at the policy level needs to happen quickly. They are busy people and busy organizations, and being able to find things quickly without the hurdles of a paywall, for example, I think makes a huge effort or impact on how they use science in policymaking and decision making.
Now, at a different level, so at the education level, what we've been talking about, of course, is publishing research papers, open access. But how can publishing open access books on the subject, on climate change, how can that facilitate? Do you think that can facilitate better and higher quality education for university students? So maybe if you can maybe draw on your own experiences from when you were a student.
I think the way in which communication, especially science communication, is evolving has changed so much since we were students. I remember just the way the internet has evolved and how we connect through these meetings, even this meeting right now through Zoom. We rely so much on technology, but it also the networks that we use to socialize are expanding the transparency and the openness of a lot of the research outputs we do. I don't know if I can say much about how open access books would have an impact, because people who write books, I think, deserve credit, usually in a monetary form. So I'm not sure how that would integrate into open access, especially for the efforts that they put into it.
Yeah, just drawing on my own experience, I think everything. So I do a lot of modeling and coding to understand climate change impacts, and everything I've learned has been from open access tools online, not necessarily books, but they're YouTube lectures on Bayesian models or Stack Overflow for R coding help. Everything's been open access. And because of that, there's this huge community. And I guess there's like an agenda where people want to help each other openly. And that's great. And I don't remember reading a lot of books. Everything was online. Yeah. So I think it's great. I think it's the way forward.
So at a broader level, how can open access improve science communication with the public, or create greater awareness about climate change and the urgency of addressing it, especially considering the nature of the topic and how there's so much debate and skepticism among the general public in certain regions?
That's a tricky one, because it does seem like having climate research available for anyone to read is going to be your most effective countermeasure to climate skeptic movements that try to discredit the science. So that just seems like an obvious way of doing it to me. I don't know how many members of the public are motivated to, or not even motivated, but like, it's not easy to read the scientific literature because there's there's a code and formula to how we write it. So I think there also has to be a bridge in between the paper and the public, and maybe that's blog posts or news articles or other ways in communicating that are also open. That's a big step that you have to have in there as well.
So do you think, like so maybe not directly through reading open access research papers, but if open access, but if climate research is published open access, it means that those who act as that bridge between the general population and researchers, with them having more access to climate research and them writing about it, of course, that will definitely, I think, improve the communication. But have you seen any trends in how, maybe increased open access publishing may have had that kind of impact?
Yeah, actually, I have first-hand experience with that, and a few of my open access publications on fisheries I've been reached, or people have reached out to me to publish science magazines, like more public-oriented science magazines and that are easier to read. And they've reached out and written short articles on the more complex science articles that we write. So that bridge is there, and I think it is facilitated with open access and them being able to find it first and read about it before reaching out to us.